I think we're ready.
I think we're ready. We're hot? Okay. My name is Dave Medberry. Let me give you a little bit of taste of Paris Summit from a few years ago, where Time Warner Cable stood up their OpenStack cloud. So I know there's people in the room that have seen this, so we're not going to run through the whole thing. But 4 years ago, Time Warner Cable stood up an OpenStack cloud. All right, so this is burning down the cloud. And Time Warner Cable was merged with Charter Communications. And as a result of that, we've got some cloud migration lessons to share with you. My name is Dave Medberry. I'm OpenStack at medberry.net. This is Steve Travis, sltravis7@gmail.com. We'll provide links out to this video. It's a very cute video if you've ever got to explain cloud to your company and how you might do it in an enterprise fashion. Today we're going to talk about decisions. What do you need to do to be successful? Let's see if I hit F11 here. We might go a little bit larger. Oh. Okay, maybe we're already full screen. Okay. What do you need to do to be successful? How you get started at something like a transition. Tracking, communicating, and tracking are important. And then some lessons learned at the end. You'll need to remind me when we get to this transition. Okay. Because I don't see that on this slide right now. Oh, it's right after this, I think. So change is hard. When Time Warner Cable and Charter Communications merge, this is Gringotts money, wizarding money from the Harry Potter world. And they have a very unique system. One knut, a galleon equals a lot of sickles equals a lot of knuts. But it's not base 10 or base 2 or base 16. And so change is hard. Charter cogitated for about 10 months what to do with our cloud. The OpenStack cloud that was running at TWC was very successful. We had a lot of production workloads on it. I will say that one caveat, it was not an edge network. It was not going into people's homes. It was business applications. But ultimately, what they decided to do was to let us burn down the cloud.
All right, so as Dave's mentioned already, Charter Communications acquired Time Warner Cable 2016. Took them a period of time to decide what to do with us. They liked the capabilities we brought. However, there was a lot of other business considerations, and not the least was just culture clash. So the net result was that we were asked to shut down our cloud. It was about 1,000 nodes that had external workloads, meaning streaming video to customers, as well as internal business process. The other main requirement was don't mess anything up. No user impact, no workload impact. This was quite a bit different for us because we had been a group that was growing our cloud about 50% a year for the last 2 years prior to this. So now we were asked to get rid of it or to eliminate it. And so I think that was fairly straightforward from that. Just down? Okay. The other decision points that were made or parameters we were given, initially it was thought that we could do this in 7 months. And we also thought that we could get this wrong, so we tagged on 3 months as a buffer onto that. But as you can see, we missed that. So the main driver here, our job was to keep the cloud running with less resources than we had run it before. We had 24 engineers basically as resourcing this. We pared that down to 8, and then we were supposed to keep things stable, offer advice and technical expertise that people needed to move, but we didn't have to do the moving ourselves. But it still took 54 weeks to get rid of this cloud or get everybody off the cloud so that we could shut it down. So 12.5 months is what that equated to. We also had a lot of requests to pull hardware out of our cloud. and make that available for other projects to resource them. Through a lot of discussion, was able to convince people that this was a dynamic system, a distributed system that worked in pooling, and that by removing some of those resources, we were going to fundamentally change the cloud and take additional risk. So the decision was made, or they were able to support us in the decision not to remove any of the hardware until the cloud was done. And that turned out to be a great thing for us. Also, likewise, our team had skill sets that were highly valued by the business, and we got requests for the engineers that remained to interact on other projects and to help them out with things like NFV and other AWS-type cloud activities. Because I knew that our resources would become critical to those other projects in a short period of time, we lobbied and got support to not allow that. So the 8 remaining engineering resources were dedicated to supporting the existing cloud.
Completely firewalled off of the rest of the company.
Completely. And then we also told them we're not going to do any changes to the cloud. And that included security updates, that included software updates. We're only going to do things that allowed us to keep the cloud moving or keep it operational. So we did do some monitoring improvements to help us for better insights. But we didn't do literally any other changes. And that also produced a very stable running cloud. And then we were given 2 project managers, and they turned out to be a great resource also. All right, so just in short, what you need to be successful in something like this, because this was not considered a positive assignment for the team, right? Everybody else got to go off and find new jobs, and 8 people got to stay behind and keep things running for something that we knew was going to go away. Go ahead.
I'm just going to jump in there right quick. Of the 16 that got let go right away, they almost all immediately had jobs because this is a very in-demand field. One of them had a job by noon after being notified at 9 a.m.
Right.
That's a true story.
Right. So to be looking for a job in the last couple of years hasn't been a bad experience, really. So. Anyway, but the people that left behind, it was kind of a bad experience because they saw people go on to new jobs and there was a lot of excitement about that, and we didn't get to. So a well-rounded team, both technically with breadth and depth, was critical, and those 8 people were able to get that and cover everything from networking through storage and Nova and every other aspect. The project management support was great too. In fact, it became critical. But also our executive management support became a key item. Once again, it was a strange decision to get rid of our cloud because they did seem to value it. At the same time, that culture clash and some other decisions just did not align with us staying. And so, but we did get a lot of team support from those executives. And then they were able to push our customers. The people on our cloud that actually had to migrate off, it was those executives that actually made the difference. And then time and monitoring. Monitoring in particular, we had a pretty good monitoring setup. Some people might debate that from the team, but it was actually very nice to have the monitoring that we did invest in because that allowed that small team to have some confidence in what was going on. So as I said, the team was critical, and really the problem with the team was just the long-term uncertainty. It was clear within the first 3 months that the 7-month time frame was not going to work out. But the question was, when do I get to look for a job? When do I get to move on? It became clear in, say, 8 months in that the 10-month time frame wasn't going to work out. So, it just became a rolling question, is when are we going to be let loose from this? We did have some uncertainty with hardware, just from the standpoint that our cloud was aging. If we were going to operate this cloud going forward, we certainly would have started replacing nodes just from obsolescence. We had a lot of nodes that were hitting like 4 years old, and we just knew we were going to have some hardware failures. So that became an issue. Also, with a small group of people, we always operated a 24/7 on-call service. It just meant that they were on call 25% of their time. So, perpetually you're on call. And then those last bullets are really how we answered some of those challenges. We kept a meeting cadence, a lot of discipline of just meeting daily and making sure everybody was checking in. Even though at times there wasn't a lot of work to do, it just became a social thing that we had to check in every day. And we had a remote team. We had a distributed team. And so, calling in and being on the video calls was a big part of that, but also offering flexibility, training, personal projects, and of course there was retention packages to keep everybody on board for that period of time. But really that flexibility and offering some training and the idea that you could go get some skills that maybe you didn't have time to get before became a central part of keeping everybody employed. So the starting point of the project really was accounting. I was in charge of keeping track of our customers before and inventory, and of course anything within OpenStack was easy to identify. What was difficult was really the user management, projects, who owned them, things like that. I obviously had not kept up with that well enough to really make this project launch well, so there was a lot of time that had to be invested up front to align projects with owners and users and things like that. Because of the merger, a lot of the original project owners had moved on and new people had taken their places. And they didn't understand what they took over. So there was a lot of education that had to happen about, no, you really have 10 servers and you really do have this much storage space. And by the way, that is a business critical system that you have and you should treat it differently than what you're getting ready to. So there was a lot of education that we had to put in place that was a surprise to us, basically.
And if you're not going through a merger or something like that, that might not be a big issue for you. But certainly if you are, you're going to lose people for sure that are running applications on your cloud. The other thing is that our cloud operators were just cloud operators. We did not run business applications. We only ran the cloud. So even though it was a private enterprise cloud, our customers viewed it almost as a public cloud because we didn't ever touch their business. They didn't ever touch our business.
Right. And it was all self-service to our best ability. The last bullet there, reporting. Reporting became a huge thing just because it took us a while to understand what our executive management needed to see to feel good about the progress, but also where they needed to engage to make a difference in the project. And we went through several iterations on what reporting needed to look like. The project managers were really good about this. They had a lot of good ideas and they generated most of the reports, but it was just an ever-evolving thing because everyone you talked to wanted to see a little different slice at it. So that became a critical aspect, actually. And just to drive the point home, tracking and communication became a large part of the work, particularly in the first, say, 3 to 6 months. After that, it didn't seem to be such a big deal, one, because we were used to it, but two, some of the people and projects started being resolved. So there still was a need to do it to the very end, just so we could drive all the projects. But it just was more work up front than I thought. The first month, I personally did 150 customer communications, individual customer communications on this. And I wasn't the only one talking to people. So it just took a lot of time, a lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings. Controlling project access became a tool we utilized to get people to talk to us. Because when you broadcast, we're going to shut down the cloud in 7 months or 10 months or whatever, and they knew it could be longer because they were used to the speed that a large corporation runs. The ability to disable their project and then just keep escalating it. Shut off their router to stop data flow into that project. That's when you really found out whether this thing was critical or not. But then being able to shut down their VMs and ultimately delete their VMs. Go ahead. Well,
not only that, there were times when they told us they were done, and we would disable their routers, and then would figure out all of a sudden that they had an external service that was using it, going back to an original fixed IP, so we could turn it right back on. So it was not just to get them off, but it was also a way to test without destroying things.
And in that phase, we were actually interacting with corporate IT and us. We were not running as corporate IT at the time. Corporate IT, of course, had change orders and a huge process to go through to make even the smallest change. And we would shut things off as soon as someone told us. 5 seconds later. So there was quite a clash there, but we worked through it. The last thing is, because of the paranoia about the risk that was involved, and as they became educated into their distributed systems and what they could be tied into and that they were unaware of, they asked us not to actually delete any resources. So we could shut them down, we could disable them, make sure they weren't talking, but we were told to preserve them in the cloud.
And we didn't know that up front, but that's another reason not to start giving away hardware as you start drawing down your cloud, because you may not be able to. You may end up needing that hardware at a later date.
Well, and this also drastically impacted reporting, because, for example, not deleting block storage resources means that you show a constant block storage usage. And we were using block storage declining as absolute proof that we were reducing the usage on the cloud. So all of a sudden, that was not a reliable metric anymore. And then just from the hardware support standpoint, software support standpoint, the obsolescence that I already talked about, we decided we could handle that with our extra capacity. So we had extra nodes that were not in operation, but had already been configured or are up and running. So if we lost a node because of hardware failure, we knew that we could bring another node online. And so the extra capacity actually became just a great asset to have and gave us a lot of confidence in running the cloud. With the software obsolescence, we actually started featuring that and telling people, you're at security risk if you're on this cloud, because it's been, like, say, more than 6 months since we've done a security update. You really should move, right? And then when it went to over a year, we were really trying to hammer that home, that we have not updated the security packs on these servers for a year. So please leave. I'm not sure.
I'm just going to jump in there right quick. So this talk was proposed for Australia Summit at Sydney. It did not get selected, but we could not have actually talked about a lot of the things because we were at security risk at that time. Our actual cloud was completely shut down by February 15th.
Right.
So we're golden now.
Yeah, we got away with it.
Yeah, so, we got away with it. Yeah.
Support obsolescence, you know, like most big cloud operators, we had hundreds of thousands of dollars in support contracts. Of course, the business for a cloud that was going away in 7 months, they didn't want to spend that money. So we struggled with this, but after the first 3 months, we quit renewing any support contracts, and we just went with the idea that from the hardware standpoint, we had extra capacity we could pull in, but from a software standpoint, we just had to rely on the team who had depth and breadth to pull it off. Largely, that worked out very, very well. There's a couple that we decided to keep just because we realized, you know, like with Ceph, we needed the depth that they could bring into that support. But it, you know, basically, it was the idea that we could regenerate any part of the cloud, except we can't replace people's data once it's gone. So. And then, once again, the strategy to not dismantle the hardware in flight was a key decision to make. Then lastly, in our initial inventory of projects, I missed the storage-only projects, the object storage-only projects. There's only about 20 that were actually meaningful, but that was about 10% of our projects. There was only about 10 of them that actually had sizable data stores. But I had to go back and talk with those projects and get them on board after the fact when we found that out. My first inventory of projects really centered around VMs, so I missed these. The conversations with these projects were, you know, fundamentally different than anything that was actually running compute. Just from the standpoint, migration really meant what's the cost and what's the capacity I can have in my future destination, and then what's the transfer time. But it really wasn't a technological discussion at all. And that's it. To you.
All right, so I'm gonna take a quick break here. In addition to being an operator of a cloud, I also run the Colorado OpenStack meetup. So get out to your local meetups, participate locally, either as an operator, as a developer, or even just as an interested person. And one of the things I'm known for is throwing things at people. So I'm gonna do that now. My first question is, who's making their first trip to Canada ever? All right, I see some right over here. So that's a Canada Frisbee. All right, a couple more. One a Canada Frisbee. You don't know what you're missing by raising your hand so early.
Yeah.
All right, that one's kind of beyond my limit there. All right. So who's been to 4 summits or more? All right. So one of the sponsors this week started giving away Frisbees right after I ran to the store and bought these Frisbees. So I've got some conference Frisbees. Raise your hand again if you've been here for a while. There's another one. And there's Chet. Who else? Who else wants a... So these are OVH. They're up on the second floor. That was supposed to go way to the back, so you can keep it. You can keep it. I've got another one, I think. OVH has a ton of Frisbees upstairs if you feel you're short. All right. So first time Canada, mini summits. All right. Who is this? This is their very first summit. Seriously? I've only got one, guys. All right. I'm just, do it again. Raise your hands.
Is that for grabs? Well, don't fall.
All right. Come see me up on the stage afterwards if you're still short of Frisbee. All right. So participate in your local meetups, and maybe they'll throw things at you too. If you look at my LinkedIn page, you will see that I'm a Frisbee thrower. That's part of my bio. Lessons learned. You can't communicate too much, and that's what I've just been doing with you kind of informally. You've got to protect the team. You're hearing the same messages over and over because we really want to hammer home the key points. Protect the cloud. Okay, so you want to protect the cloud because you don't want to lose a service. You also want to protect your retention bonus. So when you're going through a cloud transition, keep services up and running. Probably the next one is the most important one, system accounts versus personal accounts. Almost everybody sets up a cloud the very first time. They inject their SSH key, and then they go away, and that instance is still running, and nobody can get in it because the SSH key was assigned to an individual. There's a new project at OpenStack called Tattoo, which is SSH as a service. There's a talk tomorrow. I'll show you a link here in a minute. That will help you at least manage instances a little more systematically. The inventory and use tracking, all right? You need to know what's being used. And it's not something that we had to worry about too much when we were growing our cloud because we always had ordered capacity for the next 6 months. We were always looking 6 months ahead at least. But when you start turning things off, you really need to know what's on and what's off. And so that usage tracking becomes very important. All right, so there's going to be some obvious questions. Why didn't your users do virtualization to virtualization? Migrate their instances to another platform. So we didn't tell you this. The two other platforms were an internal vSphere system or AWS. Charter pre-merger actually had an existing AWS presence and a cloud relationship. And so that was that was the public cloud that was a target. The internal was all vSphere. However, the networking was a completely different architecture. So that made the decision of doing V2V virtually impossible. There were at least one team that looked at it and they punted on it. Okay? Why don't you just redeploy your apps onto those AWS or vSphere? Amen. That is the right answer. Unless you have users that are actually in the real world and they didn't think about that when they did their application setup 3 years earlier. Many of these were kind of what we call pets versus cattle. There were way too many pets. The teams that had cattle and knew how to run cattle, they cut over in a week. The teams that didn't took a year. Why don't we just turn off the cloud then instead? Obviously, there'll be some outages, but you'll just get through the process a whole lot better. As I mentioned earlier, keeping the cloud alive was probably our #1 priority. And I mean, I believe that if we still had users on it today, it would still be running today. So that's how important it was. We had to keep the cloud running. So there's the mandatory too many pets GIF and not enough cattle. I will tell you that these cattle are so pretty that I suspect they're actually pets. And it should change. There it goes. Okay, there's like four slides in that GIF. All right, so, but use cattle. And I've got some really nasty cattle pictures, but I'm not going to show you. But don't sit with pets. All right, so again, rehammering things, main takeaways. Service accounts versus personal accounts. We had service accounts, so we had a mixed keystone with Active Directory and local MySQL accounts that we called service accounts, and we encouraged any actual real projects to use those, but it still doesn't handle the key management that Tattoo should handle for you. Team engagement, Steve mentioned it earlier. You've got to keep people focused. We did have daily stand-ups, well, week daily stand-ups. We were on call a lot, but mostly we were just trying to keep people optimistic. So encourage side projects, et cetera. Inventory management and user management, we kind of mentioned that. Extra hardware. No updates. Okay, I have some comments on this one. So no updates and minimizing changes. There were cases where we had to do updates. But we did not do security updates, for instance. But let's say an SSL certificate expired somewhere outside of our control that we relied on, we had to do an update on that, which meant that we were also doing weekly deploys, even though there was almost always zero content, but we had to be able to do a deploy just in case something hit the fan. So we did the exact same cadence of CI/CD that we had always done. There was just a lot less change involved in it. So exercising CI/CD methodology was absolutely a given. We did take off Christmas week and maybe Thanksgiving week, because cable companies do a blackout those weeks anyway. You can't make changes. And the last takeaway is, how do you get owners off of a successful cloud? Well, I just want to encourage you to think happy thoughts. You do have a successful cloud if your users don't want to leave. We had, I think, not every single customer, but out of that 200 or 300, I'm going to say more than half individually thanked us as people. They said, you guys have had the best service we've ever had as a cable company.
It became embarrassing after a while.
It did, because you'd hear the same stories like, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't help you, but we were told to turn it off. Let's see. So we've got a few minutes. Yeah, we do have a few minutes for questions and answers. Who's got a question? Way in the back. If you would step up to the mic, that would help the recording and everybody else here. And you're on the aisle, so that helps too.
Thank you. So you went from having OpenStack and VMware to just not having OpenStack and going to VMware?
So historically, there was a VMware at Time Warner Cable that was completely distinct from the OpenStack cloud. So that was, there was some legacy stuff on there. That predates the Time Warner Cable OpenStack cloud. So there was VMware. But that got shut down as well, is my understanding.
No, VMware was go forward for Charter. It's still in existence.
The same VMware or a different VMware?
Yeah, the same one.
Okay.
There actually was one from Time Warner Cable and one instance from Charter. So they remained independent and had different roles, because the one from Time Warner Cable was actually going towards self-service, and that was fitting a development role. But so they did go from OpenStack, VMware, but VMware plus AWS.
So the question's a little bit of a weird one. If you were going from VMware, like imagining the same kind of situation, but VMware is being shut down, goodbye VMware, and you're going to OpenStack, are there any other technical problems or situations you can think of that might, in addition to this list, or is that pretty much?
So I don't know that, so understand your users and their apps. That's probably the most important. Obviously, make sure that you get all that money savings that you're planning on, and we did, for sure. I should have said, we started this up 4 years ago. It became very successful quickly, largely because of the self-service. And I should have also said that we were KVM and Ceph-based, pretty standard OpenStack configuration. But there was not a way for the people that had moved into our cloud to move back to vSphere, because we had a lot that did that. There wasn't a good way. So they had to basically really think of it as not a greenfield deploy, but a redeploy to a new environment with a new networking structure.
Right.
Next question. Somebody's walked up to the mic, so they get the next question.
All right.
If you want to ask a question, walk up to a mic.
Did you guys use any tooling or dashboards to report any of this data to the end users? If so, what?
So we used the inventory type of a dashboard and an individual accounting to each of the project owners for what we knew that they had. We did ask them, did we miss anything or anything like that? But it really was one-on-one engagement with each project, because each project was somewhat different, right? They had a different purpose, a different mission. Some were business critical, some were development. QA projects, we had a multi-purpose cloud. So everything from streaming video to end users to, like I said, QA. So each one was a separate engagement, basically.
How many projects?
I'll say one other point there. So we actually had an upstream core contributor to Horizon on our team. So we had very good Horizon integration that gave people a lot of visibility into their cloud. So basically, we could deploy the latest Horizon every week or every day. That helped us, in part, give them that visibility. And we also had Manaska that gave some more. And we also had Elk. So there were a lot of analysis tools available to our users.
Yeah, we had monitoring as a service. For example, they could see their own dashboards. But there were 200 projects, formal projects, individual projects in this. Up front, I just estimated maybe as many as half of them would just go away because it would be either not the right expertise, not business critical enough to actually move and go through the pain of moving. It turned out that I think like 130 actually moved. So about 70 either found a replacement project or just shut down.
Okay, so as a follow-up to that, that seems like a lot of work to have that relationship with each project. What would something be different if you could redo it, or what were the pain points that you had?
I think, so I'm going to stress again, if you can get kind of role-based ownership of things at the very beginning, so that as those people behind those roles change, the new owners can take a better control, I think that helps a lot. And that, again, because it was not only turning it off, but also turning off all the people in the company. Not everybody at TWC was let go, but a lot were incented to leave as quickly as possible. So there was just a ton of personnel churn going on behind the scene. If you don't have that situation, I think you're probably not in horrible shape. But if you do have that situation, make sure that you have really specific owners for those services.
Yeah, clueless app owners was our biggest problem, right? Somebody had inherited an application that was considered business critical that really did not understand something like a load balancer or front end, back end to their application. So they were just hoping this thing would run forever and they never have to really deal with it. And now we're asking them to move it. And so you get the most fundamental questions about, how big of a machine do I need to move on? Well, you have 10 now. I'm hoping you can do it with another 10 in AWS. But how do you move it? I mean, it's just, you have to start at square one with someone like that. So a lot of projects got contractors in that had expertise that would know how to answer these questions for them. That became a key method, I guess, for the people that didn't know. But as Dave said, the projects that knew how to run their infrastructure, they literally moved fairly easily. Usually in the first couple months, they were gone. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Another question. Thank you.
So you talked about the separation that you had between your cloud and your customers. So how exactly did you figure out the customers' needs that were more the pets category and try to help convert them over to cattle to then move over to these other virtual solutions?
They did not convert to cattle. They had to basically clone their pet, or if you want to turn it bionic, they had to bionicize their pet in a new environment. Whatever makeshift tools they used to deploy their app in the first place, they had to either recreate those, and I think in some cases it was recreation, or if they could redeploy somehow, they would redeploy if they had some scripts. But we were not involved, so that's part of the firewalling us. We didn't own those apps. And so while we would consult with them, I mean, it was maybe a dozen phone calls or less over the year where we consulted and gave some kind of expertise on things that they might consider. There was very little of that from our team.
So basically, I was the firewall. So I was not exempt from talking with these customers, and my job was to firewall these guys. So I literally had hundreds of conversations with end users or project owners about what I would do if I was in their place. How I would approach it. There's great coursework on AWS. If you're going to AWS, literally in a couple months, you can come up to speed on what you need to do for most things, right? If you have any kind of background in this stuff at all. But that's the level of the conversations. I was recommending courses to people in, I don't know, any variety of places online. So it was just the education and the communication piece just seemed like it went on forever. But it's the only way to make it happen, I think.
You good?
Yep, thank you.
Let's go to this one.
On a self-service cloud environment as you have, how do you prevent the proliferation of pets? How do you prevent that chaos?
We don't. We had no way to prevent the proliferation of pets. We allowed our users to upload their own images. So in many cases, they were actually creating their image. And that's part of being a private enterprise. We don't have some of the restrictions or oversight concerns that a public cloud would have. And so I will tell you that I know, for example, there were some Windows images out there that were running. And there were some CentOS, which early on, CentOS 32-bit CentOS, not 64-bit. And we helped them get those cloud images loaded, but they knew that was a problem. They knew they had a problem when they came to us. And those people, in my experience, were actually smart enough to know what to do when to leave as well, because they'd already kind of gone through that process getting onto our cloud. So I don't think those guys were in as bad a shape as you might imagine.
We did put on some training for users early on in this as we were building up the cloud. So like a year or two before this shutdown happened, there was maybe 3 or 4 classes that were put on just to try to educate them what's the difference between a pet, cattle, and what you needed to do to be efficient in this environment.
If you go onto YouTube, the OpenStack channel, and search for Time Warner Cable, you'll see some previous talks we gave about why our cloud was successful. That's one of the reasons that we state.
Yeah.
Is that good?
So just very briefly, I've retired a smaller chunk of cloud, and I think there's a bit missing because there must have been a stage where you got to lies, threats, escalations, desperate tactics, surely.
That we did or that they did?
You had to use that to get someone really off.
Yeah.
Surely.
So go through the dates right quick that we kind of failed back through.
Well, so we were supposed to be done with the migration. We formally started about March of 2017. We were saying by September 1st, that should be the end of the first 7 months, we should be done. By July, it was obvious that wasn't going to happen. So we started telling people, okay, October 1st. I mean, we literally went month by month. But in that, we had a vice president of engineering that was really the key go-to person. We'd have to sit down with them and explain who was making progress, who wasn't, because we really didn't want to make people angry that we're trying to make this move, but we're taking a little bit more time. We kind of understood that, but there was clearly a segment of users that either didn't know how or they were just going to wait until the last possible minute. So we basically sent him to go talk to those organizations.
Okay, so you had an enforcer. Okay, I get it now.
I've got kind of one other point there. At some point, I think it was the end of summer, we realized that one key customer or user, they basically gave us a hard deadline of January, that there was no way they were going to get off. We didn't advertise that to any of the other customers, but we knew that there was one long tent pole. And I think, was it the reverse 911 service?
Yeah.
It's somebody that had to interact with the public directly and go through some public qualifications, and they knew they couldn't do that before January. So we knew internally by the end of summer that it would very likely be post-Christmas. Now, we never advertise that, but people talk. I think we're out of time. There is a break scheduled for now. I'm going to go to one more slide and talk about it, but feel free to get up and leave if you want. So there is a tattoo session tomorrow in room 121, 122 at 4:40, and that's SSH as a service. And that might help you with getting these service level accounts better managed. Also, there's a private, there's a forum session, which is the kind of the development side of this summit tomorrow as well, that I'm going to facilitate. And I will move a lot of these lessons learned into an Etherpad we have for that. I've not done that yet. I kind of wanted to keep it tight until we had a chance to talk about it. But that's going to be tomorrow in rooms 221 and 222 at 150. But that will all be interactive like this Q&A session. So if you're an operator and you've got questions, please feel free to come to that. And if anybody else wants a Frisbee, raise your hands. And we'll be outside the door in a couple of minutes after we tear down.